Welcome to Dedicated with Doug Brunt. You have just gained access to an exclusive insider's look at the lives and works of some of your favorite authors, and hear conversations with the world's greatest writers as they discuss their writing lifestyle, creative process, latest work, and behind-the-scenes revelations.
Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today we're talking with Amor Towles. So listeners know I read all the show emails, all the comments on Apple and other places. Amor is the #1 most requested author for this show. It's not even close. He's the author of Rules of Civility, A Gentleman in Moscow, and most recently, The Lincoln Highway, which today is available in paperback. His avid fans range from Bill Gates to President Obama to Tom Hanks to me. Many believe he's the most talented author working today, and I have said to folks in the past, he's the only living author never to have published a bad sentence. Amor, it's great to see you. Welcome.
Doug, thank you very much. That was over the top.
Well,
thank you.
I noted that I said published a bad sentence because I'm sure you've had a few clunkers in your early drafts, but listeners should also know you're one of the hardest working writers I know, and by the time anything gets to print, you've made it stellar.
The James Brown of literary fiction. Maybe that should be an aspiration. Hardest working man in literary fiction. No, I'm far from that, but yes, thank you.
Well,
great to be here.
It's a pleasure, and I'm thrilled with your cocktail selection, which is the Negroni, which comes as no surprise to me. And you will note that we have Barr Hill gin here, which was a gift from our mutual pal Chris Bojalian, distilled in Vermont.
Oh, great.
So I'm going to get started on that. I'm also thrilled to debut on Dedicated the oversized ice cube. Awesome. Because the crushed ice, I got to wrestle these things out of here. The crushed ice was not getting it done for these drinks. I'm sure you would have had that experience in the past, but I had to. This went right to the top at Sirius, so you know. This was Jennifer Witz, Scott Greenstein, Gorab, Liz Aiello, all had a big meeting, gave me a little freezer space.
All involved. It was very impressive. Yeah. It is very impressive.
All right,
for those of you listening at home, these are large cubic ice cubes, perfectly done, like in a modern speakeasy.
We gotta get the big rock in there. The crushed ice, it kind of melts fast, and all of a sudden your drink's watery, and it's not good. This I heard a rumor they had Malone on by Zoom to weigh in on the freezer space. It's a big deal, and then I got approved.
Very good measuring. I'm watching. He's doing it. He's using no jigger. He's doing it by eye. But
kind of free form, yeah.
Nailing the proportions, I think.
We got to get Mike. Would you get one photo of this Barr Hill? I got to send that to Bojalian. Yeah.
I'll take a second ice cube since you've gone to so much trouble of securing.
You got it.
I know it's a little tacky to do that, but I'm going with a double. Thanks.
I'm gonna follow along with that. All right, here goes the orange.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm slicing up the orange rind. All right, voila. Okay, my friend. Cheers.
Cheers. Good to be here. Good to see you. Thanks to all our listeners.
All right. So I was thinking about, here we go. I'm settled in, got my first drink. It's always, one of the most important things in a restaurant is time to first drink to table. When you sit down,
right,
they've got to get a drink out to you fast. Then you can kind of relax and settle in. And if you're sitting there waiting for a drink forever, it's like you're all antsy at the table.
I know we're going to be talking about something entirely different, books and literature and all that stuff, but when they come and they say, would you like water? And then they leave and then bring the water. And why don't they just take the drink order right then?
Right then, yes.
I don't want the water.
What I really want is my Negroni.
Yeah, you can bring the water later. Bring the water whenever you want to bring the water. But I don't want to have we don't need to have a round of water to make up our minds about what we're going to have to drink.
Yeah. Let's draw the experience out after I've had my drink. Then I can relax.
It's tough to be in the service business. But that pattern is a very interesting, strange sort of concept that we're going to bring water and then we'll talk about drinks later.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like that's a metric every restaurant should be able to advertise is time to first drink to table. So as I was coming in today to the studio, I was thinking about your career. And as we know, writers are sort of famous for small jealousies. One someone gets a nice treatment in a New York Times review or a Kirkus starred review or something like that. But you seem to exist above that jealousy dynamic in the way J.K. Rowling was bringing in millions and millions of kids into the bookstores, getting them interested in reading. Your books in this age of great TV remind people how great the novel can be as a format. And I think that writers, when they think of you, they're not thinking of jealousy. They're thinking, go, Amor, go. Like you're getting booked on late night TV and CBS Sunday mornings. And these are not spots writers compete over. Writers, generally speaking, are not getting booked on these shows. And so when you as an author do get booked on it, I think that, people are thinking, great, rising tide.
Well, I hope we all think about that of each other. I mean, you may be right about the jealousy thing, and I'm sure I share in it both as a holder of jealousy and a recipient of jealousy, both. But you're nice to say it.
So I didn't mean to put you on the spot with all the gushing to open up, but I want to start with your early life. So born in Boston, and I know from spending some time together and also reading some articles where you've been quoted, your summers in Martha's Vineyard you have friendships from there, formative experiences from there. That sort of wonderful dynamic of summer friends has been a big element in your life. Can you talk about your early years and in particular your summers there, which I think kind of shine through in some ways for you?
Sure. I was fortunate enough that my family would spend part of the summers with a broader family, members in a community away from the home where I was going to school, and obviously, which is a luxury to begin with. But setting that aside for a second, I think that summer itself is a pretty extraordinary time for young people, no matter where you are. You kind of exit school into this incredible sort of sense of freedom as a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old, and the relationships that you make in that context. Where you don't have to go to class, you don't have to go out on the sports field. You are just sort of managing your own time. The relationships that you make it can be very sort of profoundly strong in this sort of unusual and unique way. And that certainly happened to me in that community. We made great friends, and we are still, most of us are all friends today. Yeah. And it comes from being together in that sort of Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn way. When you're young and whoever's in your backyard you're going to end up being your best friend, no matter what they're like, whatever their personality is. It doesn't make any difference. I remember you saying something like that. There's 5 kids and they're like, this is my crew. Like, we're here. We're sort of, for better or worse, this is who we're in it with. Yeah. And, for better in your case. I remember reading something about European school systems. We're talking about summer was too interruptive, and there should be, breaks should be spread out. It should all be sort of one long gradual thing. And I prefer our way for many of the things you said. Like there's also a sense of completion. Like I went from 7th grade to 8th grade, and I can spike the ball at the end of 7th grade before I move on, and then I get this big gap of a variety of experiences. I think it's important. And a 2-week vacation feels like a 2-week vacation. Summer felt endless. At the front end, it felt endless, and that's a big change, I think, for the way a child experiences it. And you're right. I wouldn't go for the diced up, scattered 2-week vacation. Yeah, that sounds no fun to me. It's un-American. Yeah, exactly. So then on to Yale undergrad. And were you pursuing writing as an undergrad? I know you come from a bit of a finance background. I think your dad was a Brown Brothers guy, maybe. My father was a banker and in financial services generally. But I began writing fiction when I was in first grade. I aspired to be an author when I was in first grade. I wrote probably my first fiction maybe in 3rd or 4th grade or that kind of thing. And so by the time I arrived at Yale, I was primarily interested in reading literature, fiction, poetry, philosophy, and writing it.
As a career path.
I guess I didn't really ask myself that too much about where the money, about whether it was a good job or not, but it was just really what I wanted to do. It's what I love doing. And so I took, the majority, more than half of my classes at Yale were in literature. So I would I was lucky enough that at the time, through AP exams, you could place out of a lot of things. There were a lot of requirements at Yale, but I placed out of my language requirement. I placed out of my math requirement. I placed out of my science requirement. And it meant that I could just start packing schedule with more and more literature
electives.
classes. And I think in my sophomore year, I think I took 7 literature classes out of 10 classes. And so because that's what I love doing. And sort of a side story on that is when I was a sophomore, a great New York-based avant-garde writer named Walter Abish came to teach for the semester. And I applied and got in to Abish's class. And he was terrific, a real profound avant-gardist in sort of coming out of the 1950s and 60s in the United States. And had an eye patch, was born in Austria, like a great...
Oh, nice.
And lived in the village, lived down across the street from Phoebe's. I think he still lives there in his 90s. In the village. And so really a great guy. Well, in this class where we were writing short stories and I had a good relationship with him and you're getting reinforcement as a young artist. One of the things he did is that towards the end of the semester, he said, hey, I don't know what this is going to mean to any of you, but here's 100 books that I think are fascinating, interesting novels that to me in some way triggered some sense of admiration for what they were trying to achieve. And it's sort of a mixed bunch, but for what it's worth, here it is. And so I took that, and we would get out, as sort of like today, college would let out like May 15th or something crazy,
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go to the vineyard by myself. There was nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would spend the sort of the winter going to used bookstores, trying to find as many books off of Abish's list as I could find. And I would arrive on the vineyard with like 25, 30, something like that. And I would read a book a day. And I would do that.
A day.
Yeah, and
Wow.
I did that for 2 to 3 weeks. And that was a huge...
So you've completed the 100 by now.
Well, I don't think I have. I should have. But then, of course, you start getting lists from other people. But I did. I read pretty deeply into it. I probably read 70 out of the 100, before I got moved on to other things. And but anyway, that was a big experience.
So 2 things. I would love to see that list if you are able to acquire that old list that you
I
started
have that
on.
list, yeah.
And number 2, I would love to see you make that list. I mean, that would be like a great, New Year's thing for you to put out, like Amor Towles' top 100.
I actually, I'm asked enough for, what books I'm interested in or what I've admired that I do, when people send me emails, they go to amortowles.com and they go to the contact page,
Mm-hmm.
they'll say, what are you reading? I have a list of I can't remember, maybe it's 70 books I admire that I share with them. So I do that, and I'm happy to do that with you, Doug, too.
All right. Thank you. Please send. So from Yale undergrad, and by the way, you're like the 5th person from Yale undergrad on this show.
Is that true?
Yeah. I mean,
that's a bad sign.
Well, Min
probably.
Jin Lee is one, and Lee Bardugo is another. I think there are others. I'll have to go back and look. But from Yale undergrad, you go to Stanford for an MFA, where you studied with Peter Matheson, right?
No, I studied with Pat Matheson while I was still at Yale.
Okay.
And at Stanford, where I actually got a master's I got an MA. It was a part of the fiction writing program, so I was in the Stegner workshop, we'd call it, over the 2 years. But I also received a master's in literature, which was great for me because, again, I have found as a writer the reading of literature more productive for me than the workshop format.
Mm-hmm.
I've got nothing against the workshop, and a lot of great things come
meaning
out of
like
the workshop.
collaboration, talking with different aspiring or writers or aspiring writers about stuff. You just rather read a great book.
I'd rather read a great book with a professor who's world expert on Melville. Like I was studying with Al Gelpi at Stanford. It was a world authority on Melville and Emerson and Whitman and that. And I enjoyed the workshop, and the workshop is great, and you do learn things there. But I'm just saying, for me, as I compare the two, I learned more from the careful reading of literature than I did from debating the merits of the stories of my peers at the table, in the workshop format. But yes, I did that there, and study with a guy named Gil Sorrentino, who was another great sort of modernist from the 50s and 60s in the United States.
What was Matheson doing over at Yale? He was visiting.
Matheson was visiting. He came in for a semester. Was probably in his 60s at the time, and so I applied to his seminar, and then we became quite close. And I ended up doing independent projects with him. He came back for another semester, and I studied with him again, and then we became friends and maintained a relationship, until he died. Yeah.
So despite his encouragement and recognition of your gift, really, you then went into finance. So from 1991 to 2012,
Yes.
you were an investment manager at Select Equity Group. Is that right?
That's right.
So 21 years there. I'm wondering how you feel about that 21-year period. I mean, do you view that as like it had to happen that way? I mean, life is great for you now, so I can't imagine there are big regrets one way or the other. But did it have to happen that way, or it's just simply what happened? It's how it worked out.
I think it's I loved my job. It was great fun, and we and the firm's still thriving, but it was great. I had great colleagues. We had great clients. We had a great craft. It's a well-paying job too, I guess. So it was a great 20-year.
Was it kind of? Did you start it? Was it sort of entrepreneurial?
George,
I think there's a lot in.
The founder started it, and he's still at the helm today, and started on his own. I was the first employee to join him on a long-term basis, and so, but it really, I mean, it's his shop, and he's done an amazing job steering it and moving it forward. It's his dream, and it's been fulfilled and continues to be fulfilled. But anyway, it was an amazing group. The leadership, my colleagues, my clients, our clients.
There's a lot of overlap between writing and entrepreneurship. You sort of come in and write the next chapter of the thing, and so I can see how some of the entrepreneurial aspects of that would satisfy some of your creative needs. I don't
really think of it. It didn't. I mean, it didn't in that sense. It satisfies a different kind of desire. But I think more going back to your point, Matheson was a great supporter of my work, and he was really the first person where it was someone I truly admired and who had looked at my work very closely and has said, I think you can do this. And when your mother says it doesn't mean anything, so here was a person that was a big moment for me as a young artist, is to have Matheson's approval. And so when I went and began working in the investment field, it really upset him. And he had invested a lot of time and energy.
Did he sit you down for a conversation saying, why are you doing this?
So, he would say, so are you still on that, you still working on that thing? And I said, yeah, I'm still working there, because we would see each other every year or whatever. And he said, yeah, okay, well, how's your novel coming? Well, I'm kind of sort of falling behind, because, and he said, yeah.
Was this early drafts of rules, or?
No, this is long before that. So this is in the early 90s. So at any rate, so I stopped writing for a decade, basically, while we were getting the firm off, building the firm from its smaller beginnings to a larger stage, and so I stopped writing for 10 years. And I would see Peter, and he would sort of say, "How's it going?" And he kind of could tell that I wasn't making progress as a writer. And so finally, we went out to dinner one night, and he said, "Listen," at the end of dinner, he said, "Listen, I've known a lot of people, artists of varying kinds, movie makers, writers, poets, dancers, painters, who've gone to Wall Street. I knew them in my generation, the generation that came after me. I knew them the generation that came after that, and I know them in your generation. And what I can tell you is that that's an interesting enough career with interesting enough people that pays well enough, that my experience is that anyone who left art to go work on Wall Street never came back."
It's a black hole.
"And so you should assume that your life as a writer is now over."
Oh my gosh, he really laid it on you.
He did. And so that was the end of our dinner. And that was that kind of, he was right to say it, and God bless him for saying it, because it haunted me, and I kept, even as I continued to work, I thought, he's right. If I don't redirect some of my energy and explore my interest in writing, my abilities in writing, develop my craft further, then I'm going to end up, bitter and a drinker. And so I eventually began carving out time on the weekends.
Now you're just happy and a drinker.
Now I'm just happy and a drinker. But so I started writing on the weekends, and wrote a book over 7 years that I didn't like, and set that aside in my 30s, and then in my early 40s, having learned a lot from that experience, I wrote Rules of Civility. And then when that became a bestseller, I then retired from the firm, letting them go on and without me, and that's been great. So it's been a good sequence of events. But but I don't know. Do I wish that I had gone and become a writer at the age of 27 and stayed the course? There's a little bit of bittersweet regret looking back on that, mostly because I would have written more books by now.
Yeah, 21 years at your pace, that's 4 more books.
Yeah, exactly, or at least, right? And so, so anyway, so that's a little. You sort of, I carry that with me. So then, but that does put more interest in me making sure that everything I do now, I want it to be challenging for me. I want it to be interesting to the reader. I want it to be the best possible work I can do, because I don't have a runway.
Yeah.
I'm not Don DeLillo, who published, 4 books in 6 years in his 20s or late 20s, early 30s or whatever it was, and he's using them to experiment. You can tell that some of those are quite unfinished, his early novels. They're quite short and quick and weird, and he's working towards the work that he's going to do in White Noise and Underworld and things like that. So I don't have that luxury where my first book's coming out in my mid 40s. I better start getting it right now.
Well, it is how it worked out. And as readers, it's worked out great. I have 2 quick follow-up questions on that, though. Number one is the book you worked on for 7 years that's in the bottom drawer. Will that ever come out?
No.
Number 2, you have to, when you donate your papers to the New York Public Library, you'll have to donate those so we can all see it.
I might have to destroy it, but go on.
That's what Marlon James did with his first thing. I think you know that story. Number 2 is, I should have looked this up when I was doing my homework. What year did Matheson pass away?
Oh, I'm not good with
Before
remembering.
Rules?
No, Rules came out, became a bestseller, and then we had lunch together shortly thereafter. And
he must have been so happy.
Well, he was very happy, and I was so happy that we could have had that moment together, and then that I could show him that I did come around, and that the time and effort that he invested in me, that I
did you say,
ultimately
man,
paid it
that
off.
really shitty thing you said to me 12 years ago, it worked.
No, yeah. I'm grateful for what he said. I don't think that, I would say it to a young person myself someday.
Good. So I remember one of our conversations from a long time ago, and I can't remember if I have this exactly right, but you had a notebook that outlined these ideas, but you basically had 5 or 6 ideas that you kept with you through some of your years in finance that you thought were good ideas for a book. And Rules was one of them, and you said, I'm going to do this one first, or maybe you presented a group of ideas to an editor or an agent early on. Yeah. Am I making this up? No,
I certainly didn't present it to an agent or editor, but what you're describing is a version of the truth. So, you're very close.
I must have had many cocktails.
I mean, the full picture is that having wanted to be a writer since I was a kid and having written fiction in high school and college and graduate school, there are many stories that I have thought of that I would like to tell. Certainly closer to 100 than 10, let's say. And some of those I have been thinking about for 10 years or 20 or 30 years. And in some cases, I have written down on a note card what the full idea is. In some cases, that note card has become 4 pages of written notes. In some cases, it's become 3 notebooks filled with material as I've thought about it more and more and more. So in my office, there are multiple stacks of notebooks that are related to different story ideas at different stages of development. And then, Word files and scraps of paper, there's the whole gamut, And so, yes, when I finish a work like A Gentleman in Moscow, what I'm generally doing is looking out and saying, okay, what out of this little forest of ideas is most appealing to me right now? And very often it is going to be something where it's not the note card. It's something where there's 3 notebooks full of work already, because obviously that's something that's grabbed me, obsessed me to a greater degree, and I can see it in greater detail. And then you'll sort of pick which of those stacks of notebooks is the one we're going to go with, and and then you say, okay, the Lincoln Highway. Let's do the one with the kids. The kids in the car. It's the kids in the car this time.
I love the idea that there's a single note card out there that could be the idea behind A Gentleman in Moscow.
Yeah.
Or
matchbooks. Yeah, in the old days.
I mean, how would are any of your 3, can you draw the line back to that single note card, or are they all in a notebook?
A Gentleman in Moscow, I had the idea for that book while I was walking into a hotel in Geneva in my former career. And I had the idea on the elevator on the way upstairs to having checked into the hotel. Mm-hmm. And I have the hotel stationery from that night of, sketching out the major events of that story on the first 4 handwritten pages of notes on the hotel stationery. So yes, sometimes, and they're
awesome.
Dated, so I can go right back to within minutes.
That should be in a frame somewhere if it's not already.
All
right, so you've gotten... Rules was 2011, Rules of Civility. Yep. Gentleman in Moscow was 2016.
Yep.
Lincoln Highway 2021. So a 5-year clip here.
Right.
And this is a good segue into process because I would love to see you speed it up because I want more reading material from you. But
me too. Yeah.
I know you're a relentless outliner. Your outline is almost like a living document as you go through your first draft. Can you talk about how you use the technique of outlining in your work?
And you're right, Doug. I am a person who wants to plan very thoroughly what the book is going to be before I start writing chapter 1. And so I do spend this multi-year time frame. I call it the design phase. I'll use those notebooks to imagine every event, every setting, the characters and their backgrounds, their psychology, the tone of the book. I'll just keep working through the notebooks, getting a better and better sense of the story in its totality. And when I can I understand the book from beginning to end in its totality, then I'll start building an outline and then I'll write it. And so it is a multi-year process just to get started for me. And I do that really. This is a little counterintuitive. The reason that I've become such a dedicated outliner and sort of someone who thinks very carefully about all this in advance is the counterintuitive part is that it's if we talk about modern neurological science, the left brain is the analytical side, the problem-solving side, the mathematical side, and the right brain is the creative side, the imaginative side. And we understand that the brain has these two sort of hemispheres where they operate a little bit differently. And the reason I do the outlining is because I want to maximize the input of the creative, imaginative, unpredictable, subconscious-driven side of my mind while I'm writing the chapters. And if I know what's going to happen, that's what allows that to occur. Whereas if I was going into a chapter and I don't know what's going to happen, I don't know who's going to walk into the door, I don't know what his or her background is, I don't know what the implications are for what's going to happen next, I don't know what the tone is going to be, then a lot of the energy intellectually is going into sort of problem-solving mode. So while I'm writing, I'm figuring those things out. And in essence, the wrong side of the brain is driving the car.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is know everything that's happening, know the people, know the setting in a rough sense, know the characters in a sort of a personal way, so that while I'm actually writing the chapter, it is the right side of the brain that takes over. And that way I can really follow the poetic instincts. I can follow the subconscious, ideas that pop up. I can follow images that present themselves, which I'm not even sure why they're there. And the combination of words that surprise me. And so all of that's what I'm interested in within the chapter is having that kind of, because that's what to me really brings the life to the chapter at the end of the day.
That's terrific. I've never heard it described that way, and even down to the physiological aspects of it. But as you know, and I know you've listened to a few episodes of the show, some folks come on here and say, I never outline because that takes the energy out of it. As a fellow outliner myself, I don't understand that. They're like, they feel like it adds energy. It all comes back to the thing. Every writer is different. Everybody's brain works differently. I think my brain works closer to how yours does because I need those kind of signposts already sort of established, and then I can tell the story through there.
It is different for different kinds of writing and for different writers, as you say. Lee has been on the show. Lee Child has been on the show. We both know Lee. Lee is, he is someone who says I don't outline, and whether it's true or not. I mean, I think it is true, but I get it from his standpoint because part of what Lee writes with great energy, a great economy, and part of what I can imagine, and I'm imagining, I'm Lee for a second, is he wants to be surprised by what happens to Reacher next, because that's what sharpens his focus, right? It's like Reacher suddenly being attacked in a restaurant out of nowhere. Lee is like Reacher at that moment, which is I got to take in everything as quickly as possible as to see what's going on if I'm going to get out of this thing alive, and that brings great energy and economy to the way that he writes that. And for him, if he sort of thought about the scene in advance, he might write it in a duller way, you do have to figure out as a writer based on what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to write, what the tone of the work is what works for you, and that is so. There is plenty of room for variety.
And by the way, your outline is not written in stone either. So as you get into chapter 4, you're adjusting your outline for chapter 5.
Yeah, that's right,
and that sort of thing.
As I like to describe it, is the as I'm writing the first half of a carefully outlined novel, the back half of the outline is changing radically, because I'm learning through the writing of the first half of the novel what the back half of the novel should be. I'm getting a better understanding of what it should be, and I'm beginning to elaborate and make to one degree, things are changing in the back half of the outline. Events are changing, characters are changing, whatever. But also, it's getting richer and richer and richer It's getting longer in essence as I get a better understanding of
Have you
where
ever
this
had a
is all
massive
going.
change? Like your ending to Gentlemen was great with the count. I won't say the whole thing to spoil it for anyone who, if there's anyone left on the planet who doesn't know it, but
Protect that.
Was that something that you knew from the start and remained unchanged, or was that part of the living document and you changed the ending as things went on?
For my 3 novels, Rules of Civility, Gentlemen, and The Lincoln Highway, I knew exactly how they were going to end at the very beginning, and they did not change in either of the 3 cases. And so I knew who was going to be in the final chapters, what they were going to be doing, why. I mean, I knew all that. And in many ways, all of the imaginative work that goes on in the design phase is trying to figure out, I know how it's going to begin. I know exactly how it's going to end, like day one. And I'm trying to figure out everything that happens in the middle.
Yeah. How about titles? Do you ever have a late in the game change on title of any of your 3 novels?
In every case. A Gentleman in Moscow was called, up until, the book was on, practically in its way to being published, was called The Songs of St. Petersburg, which was a title that I had in my notebooks for more than a decade. And my editor, Paul Slovak at Viking, said, Amor, I love the book and I love the title, but you do know that it takes place in Moscow, not St. Petersburg. And I'm like, yeah, there's a problem, So I don't know. So I don't know why I was stuck with that title, but we changed that. Rules of Civility was called Few Are Chosen, and The Lincoln Highway was called Unfinished Business.
I think improvements in all 3 cases.
There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, but I raise that because I'm working on a book now to be out in September.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
And
I thought you had a title for that.
Well, so here's the story. So I was working around titles. My editor and I were back and forth, and we were like, we're going to crack, we're going to open up a bottle of red wine. We're going to sit down and we're going to figure out this title at one point. So halfway through drafting, this is like almost a year ago, I have a title idea, and it's great. We both fall in love with it. And
I even saw a picture of the cover. Didn't I see a picture of the cover?
Yeah, it's the title on the picture that you saw.
Yeah, okay.
And so then my editor, Peter Borland, who's awesome, is in a meeting with the sales team at Simon & Schuster, and Jonathan Karp is in there, the CEO of S&S, and he presents the book, and everyone likes the book a lot, and they're like, this is great, but you're kind of missing the boat with the title. Like, it should be this other thing. So then I'm out I'm on the road, and I get a call from Peter. It's like, hey, the meeting went really well. Everyone loves the book. However, Jonathan had a suggestion on a new title. I'm like, we're revisiting the title now?
Yeah, right.
So anyway, I won't spoil it, but short story is we have a new title.
Okay, great. Do you think it's an improvement? Or, well, you don't have to say that on the radio.
It's like 50-50. I think the sales, I don't want to, be a headwind in front of the sales team. They seem to prefer this other one, and they're the experts on how to sell books. So we're going to go with them.
Great.
So, all right, more process questions for Amor. This is an insider piece of info I have, but you have a separate Word file per chapter, at least on one of your books, right?
Yeah.
Do you do that all the time?
I usually do that, yeah.
Because it gets unwieldy otherwise, I guess.
Yes, that's right. And usually there's a lot of underwork. I don't know how else to put it. You do a draft of a paragraph, and you're like, that's close, but it's not right. I will copy and paste that to the bottom of the document and start rewriting it from scratch, and it'll evolve into something different. But I kind of want to keep the original draft below, because sometimes you're like, oh, the first thing was better.
Yeah.
Having deleted it would drive me crazy. I may write a whole scene in a chapter that is not going to be used, and that gets moved down below. I'll start to ask myself questions, and I'll have sort of a running list of questions that are identified as such. Open questions. And I'll have, by the time I end the first draft of a chapter, I might have 15 questions to myself about, it might be a factual question, but it might be a question about motivation, or should this happen, or should that character be here? And so in essence, the chapter document is getting longer and longer and longer. And has all kinds of sort of ancillary.
If you had it for the whole novel, it would just be insane. There's no way to do it.
You could navigate.
Yeah. So is this something you learned as you went? Or have you always done this, or you kind of learned this technique as you? Well,
I didn't write novels when I was young, so I didn't really have that challenge of managing this more complex body of work. And so that is something I kind of learned on the go, in the trade.
Yeah. Here's another insider tip. So Amor and I will occasionally meet for lunch. And you always beat me to the restaurant by a long ways. And when I get there, I get a little window into what your other lunches look like, because you have a handful of pages.
Yeah.
and you're revising them. And so it seems this is sort of I won't name your favorite spots, so you get mobbed out there, but you got like 5 or 6 restaurants around town you love, and you go to lunch with a handful of pages to revise, and you have a nice lunch. And it's sort of like this romantic thing of like Hemingway in a Paris cafe. It's, there you are having sort of a working lunch, revising pages of the next great novel.
Yeah, my behavior is I try to be at my desk at around 8:30 at work before I've thought about anything, done anything, before the news, before Twitter, before email. And what I'll do is I'll work at my desk from 8:30 to noon or something like that. And then, as you're saying, I will go have lunch by myself somewhere usually. And so, and when I go, I will either bring the morning's work and edit it, as you're describing, or I'll bring my notebook and start thinking about, the next chapter. So I might have notes on the next chapter but I don't really have the opening paragraph. And so I'll use sort of that lunchtime to start experimenting with how might this paragraph open. I know what's going to happen in it, and I kind of have a sense of the stakes of what the chapter is going to be, but I don't really kind of know how we're going to enter it. And that's great because while I'm sitting there, if I
are you always in like your favorite booth or favorite spot at the bar?
I do. And I I'm a big fan of the McNally organization, so I'm at Balthazar, sometimes, or at Pastis or Minetta at night, or I like the Danny Meyer universe, Union Square Cafe and Gramercy Tavern and those places. But I like the Gotham Bar and Grill. I usually like to be in a place where I can sit and work at a bar. That's my preference, where my lunch can be served at the bar. I know the bartender, and people, they leave me alone. And, but yeah, I find it's a great gear shift for me. So working at my laptop at my desk, carefully writing and editing paragraphs or sentences or chapters, whatever, to then go out and do an environment where I have, the food, maybe I'll have wine, maybe I won't, maybe I'll have a drink or not. But sometimes it'll often be that I'll be sitting there with my notebook and I'll just say, oh, this is the way this chapter should open, is with this scene or this observation or this memory or whatever. And then it's like, boom, 4 pages can come very quick of, let's say, of handwritten notes about how that opening is. And that's invaluable because that's what I can do next morning at 8:30.
Yeah.
Is I know when I get up at 8, I'm at my desk at 8:30, I'm not going to be staring at a blank page. I know the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type in those notes from yesterday's lunch, and that will be the beginning of the chapter and get me going.
That gets your rhythm going.
Yeah,
it gets like the sweat going and you're ready to go.
Which is a version of, the famous Hemingway thing of, of always trying to stop in the middle of a good idea. Like, that was sort of his, I don't remember how he put it exactly, but that's the notion, is that when you're writing along and you're like, oh, great, this is perfect, this scene could be this, is don't write it through to the end necessarily. Get it started and stop, and give yourself a break, because the next day that'll get you into the writing immediately. And getting in is always a tricky part of the process.
So when you're back at the desk, does it have to be that desk? Or can you write anywhere? Or is there really like a certain atmosphere or a place, or what's your sort of comfortable writing spot?
I'm overly precious in that regard. So like, I have writer friends who write on planes. I don't really write very well on planes. I don't know why. I wouldn't write very well. I love the cafe for what it is, and I love being alone in my office, but I couldn't write at my dining room table while my family was wandering around. Yeah. Like that would drive me crazy, and I would never get into the right mode. Yeah. So I do kind of have to carve out my little sort of space with whatever. I don't know what that means.
Could it be a hotel? It could be in Martha's Vineyard or in New York City or whatever.
And I write in different places, but it's usually a place where I can sort of make my own little space for a moment.
And by hand, or you type?
I do it all of the above, kind of thing. But usually when, as I say, I'll often start a chapter by hand, but then once I get going, if I really understand, if the chapter has momentum, I have to write at a keyboard because I can't write by hand fast enough.
Interesting. Okay. I know you're doing some short stories now, and I think there's a collection maybe coming out early next year.
Yeah, the collection, it's pretty much done. I have a collection of short stories that's coming out. It'll be almost right around a year from now. And there's one, the last story is going to be quite long, and I'm doing some work on that, but everything else has pretty much been handed in and is in good shape. So
how is it different for you writing those? I mean, could you ever go to a cafe and dash out a short story in one sitting? Or do you plan differently? I mean, there's no way you would plan the way you did for Gentlemen for a short story.
You're right. It is a smaller planning program, thankfully. But I I am. A lot of people are writing short stories. A lot, if you read the New Yorker or the Paris Review, a lot of those short stories are 3, 4, 5,000, 6,000 words. My short stories tend to be more like 15,000 words. So they're not dash off in a restaurant. They might have 10 sections, and I might do a section, dash off a section. But so they are a little bit longer than the typical short story in the field. But anyway.
When do you normally let others get the first peek at your work?
When I'm done with the first draft and having revised it once. So I don't share with anybody. Not my wife, not my agent, not my editor. Finish the first draft, clean it up, and then I might share it.
And then that's your first 3?
Well,
wife,
3, and then I have
editor?
a couple of other. I usually give it to about 6 people when I'm ready at the same time. And I like to give it to the ones we talked about, editor, New York, agent, wife. But then I have 3 friends who are very good readers, and I will give it to them, and I'll give it to them all at the same time. And I'll try to get feedback from them within 30 to 60 days through, in essence, a series of lunches, where I'll sit down with them and interview them about their experience reading the work.
Mm-hmm. All right, last process question for you.
Yeah.
Do you read, of course you read, but what do you read when you're writing the first draft? Do you try to stay away from fiction that's a little bit too close to your...
I run from fiction that's close to what I'm doing, yeah. I do not, I don't... I might read, a 19th century novel that has nothing to do with what I'm doing, while when I'm writing deeply, I'm probably reading a little bit less, too. But I definitely, I avoid reading what I'm working on, with the exception that maybe a year, 2, 3 years before I do a project, I'm kind of interested in what was written around the time that I'm going to be writing in. So a few years before I set out to write The Lincoln Highway, which takes place over 10 days in 1954, I set out to read a handful of books that were all written around that time. So in sequence, I read James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is his first novel. I read The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit by Sloan Wilson, Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye, which is really the last of the great Philip Marlowe books. And I read Flannery O'Connor's short story collection, A Good Man is Hard to Find, which was her first work. And what's kind of fascinating about those 4 books is they're all written in published within about 18 months of each other. But you have Baldwin writing about Harlem, roughly at the time, a little bit before the mid-50s. Flannery O'Connor's writing about the Deep South. Sloan Wilson is, his book, A Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, is really the first great book that describes the new white-collar executive that had returned from the Second World War, this sort of veteran that comes back, lives in Greenwich, works in an ad and PR business in Manhattan, takes the train every day, wears a suit and a fedora. I'm sure that it was a big influence on Mad Men, for instance. The world of Man in a Gray Flannel Suit is a description of that world. And then you have, as I say, Chandler writing about Los Angeles at that point in the 50s, kind of at a seedy turn in the life of the city. And so these are sort of 4 very different voices, American voices, writing about 4 different parts of 4 different ways to live in the United States, and with a very different tone in each case. And that's great for me. I love that, where you can sort of get a snapshot of not simply, I don't want to read a book that's about what I'm going to write about specifically. What you want to write about is sort of what's going on around
the atmosphere
and the periphery. And then that can kind of bubble up and influence me in different ways as I'm writing the book, and sharpen my sense of the diction of the moment, the spoken language of the moment, the way a room would be described, the cars would be described, et cetera, all that kind of stuff, but doing it in this very sort of collage-like fashion.
That's a perfect segue to the next question I want to ask you, which is about timely versus timeless, because so Lincoln Hideaway set in 1954, as you mentioned, which is about as close to present day as you get. I can't remember where Gentleman Ends, but except for you have that sci-fi novella, You've Reached Your Destination, which is sort of set in the near future. But question is, would you ever set a novel in the present, and can you discuss timely versus timeless?
So the short story collection that will come out next year, there's about, I can't remember, maybe 7 stories set in New York, and they're all mostly in the late 90s, early 2000s. So more contemporary in that sense. So I'm happy to write about in any period, basically, if that's what the story demands. I sort of start with what's the story, and then, when should it be told and where should it be told and who's in it, all kind of grow out of the idea for the story. What was the other question?
Timely versus timeless.
Oh, yeah. So, and I appreciate your asking about the timely versus timeless thing, because there's a lot of great writing that is written to be timely. And in fact, probably the majority of nonfiction is written to be timely today, or at least a significant portion of it, in that it's someone writing about the political environment, the environmental environment, an event that's happening in the courts, events happening in race, and the books are being written to examine what we're going through and to give insight into how we can confront what we're going through and potentially change the course of events. Or you're writing about political figures of the day or celebrities of the day, whatever. Those are timely books, and some people are writing fiction on a timely basis too, and with a timeliness in mind. And that's just not for me. I'm really not interested in writing timely work. I don't trust myself to write timely work. I'm interested in writing timeless work, and a work that, as I said earlier at the beginning, could be read by people of different ages, from different parts of the world, from different social classes, that enter the tale and benefit from living in the world of that tale for the whatever short time of period that it takes them to read it. That's really, and I want the book to have meaning 50 years from now, to a whole new, generation of readers. And so to achieve that, for me, it's easier if I take myself out of the pressing issues of the times. Yeah. And I really sort of go into something which seems like it's of no interest to the times. I love, when a topic of mine speaks to me as being completely untimely. Yeah. Because then I'm like, oh yeah, that might work. This might work.
I try to reconcile that all the time. Like I get what you're saying, and I've read where you've said this before, and I get totally what you're saying. However, I would love to see you still take on a big, bulky novel of the present day, because there's just a difference between sort of the fleeting issues of the day versus something universal about today that matters. Like The Sun Also Rises, Hemingway, that is a timeless book that captured that generation. Or even like It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. It was about the Lindbergh thing. And that book is so relevant today, and it sort of captured something universal about the time and helped a generation sort of figure itself out in a way.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I won't ever do it. And as I say, my short stories are kind of more in the present mode. But I think that when I do it, it's along the lines that you're describing. It's not going to be in a way that's really drilled down into current events. I had no desire and would have no desire to rip
something off the headlines
or
and do
COVID
that.
book, or a book about the Trump era, like that. Then I run from that, But if it was writing about, what it means to, be alive in America in the 21st century, sure, how are families operating? How are we interacting state to state, in some way? How are we being influenced by the media and technology, but as an undercurrent, then that's something that I certainly would be interested in doing. I just don't know when that's going to happen.
Well, you capture these periods that you write in a magical way. And I know you've described yourself. I think I don't know if this was said about you or if you were trying to explain it yourself, and these are your words, but an impressionist version of history, wherein you're not trying to be some academically accurate historian. You're providing the reader a backdrop to set a mood and create an atmosphere. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of the craziest letters you've gotten? So given that you are not a 100% accurate historian on things, what are some of the craziest letters that you've gotten on something you may have gotten wrong historically?
I don't know. I mean, I crazy. I don't know. Some of them are great.
Zealous.
Yeah, zealous is probably more accurate. I mean,
By the way, I'm topping up my Negroni. I don't know if you're interested.
No, I'm good.
I've got an extra
still working
cube here.
Thank you. A favorite one of mine was that in A Gentleman in Moscow, the main figure, the Count, goes to the roof of the Metropole Hotel, and he's in a very low point in his life, and he sort of is revitalized to some degree by running into an old handyman that is keeping bees on the roof and who makes harvest honey on the roof in the middle of the Bolshevik era. And Count is eating the honey and says, "Oh my God, this tastes just like the lilacs from the Alexander Gardens." And the old man says, "Yeah, well, that's the way it goes. The boys, they go out to the lilacs, and when they come back, the honey tastes like lilacs. And, a couple of weeks from now, when they go out to the cherry blossoms, when the boys go out to the cherry blossoms, they'll come back and the honey will taste like cherry blossoms. That's the way it works." And the Count says, "Oh, that's great." And I get this lovely letter from a woman in upstate New York saying, "Oh, I really enjoyed your book. It moved me a great deal. But I should tell you that the boy bees do not go out to the lilacs and the cherry blossoms. It's the girl bees who do that. The boy bees don't go anywhere at all." And it's like, oh, right.
That is next level detail.
Exactly. So then from hardcover to paperback, I made that change. Now, absolutely. Readers of A Gentleman in Moscow today.
Didn't you have a letter also on like the football?
Yes,
field
the Lincoln
goal
Highway.
post
The Lincoln Highway.
Yeah.
I did at one point in the Lincoln Highway, one of the characters by mistake sets a goalpost on fire in a high school football field, and he's describing in great sort of wonder and joy the fire going up the middle post and across the shoulders and up the arms, so it becomes like this burning figure of a man, and sort of reminiscent of a burning man on fire, and in exultation. And so yes. Now, many of your listeners are going to be ahead of me on this, but it turns out, thanks to a number of writers, that the goalposts in 1954 did not look like a Y; they looked like an H.
Right.
And so, yes, I did go back and change that.
Also fixed for the paperback.
Sure.
All right.
For hardcover to paperback, that has changed. Now, of course, sometimes you get things where they say, meh, and they're wrong. It's not. And that happens too. And sometimes you're right. One of them was, and I can't, this amazes me that this has happened. I think I've gotten 5 letters on the fact that in Rules of Civility, the main character says, well, so-and-so got his just desserts. And in the book, it is spelled with 1 S. And I have received at least 5 letters saying, and some of them quite hot, the sloppiness of the modern writer and the lack of editing of the major publishing houses and, and the lack of education. But dessert is spelled with 2 S's. And they go so far as to say, and by the way, that's easy to remember because my teacher told me in first grade.
Want more.
Yeah, dessert always says you want a second helping of dessert. Yeah. So that's why 2 S's. Yes, this is true. Dessert is spelled with 2 S's. But the expression just desserts has nothing to do with cake. So, just desserts comes from the concept of it is what the person justly deserves. And so it comes down through the language. There you go. See? So sometimes you get those things too. So, but you have to write back.
So 1 S is correct. Just desserts is 1 S.
Just desserts is 1 S, people.
All right. Good. Don't write to Amor about that.
Yeah, cut it out.
All right. So by the way, I've always admired how good you are about responding to, if you send Amor an email, it may take a little bit. He's writing, but he writes back. And so which is yet another great segue because as I mentioned earlier in the show, you've been requested far and away number 1. And so I wanted to get to 2 listener questions.
Oh, yeah,
here.
great.
One is from John Forsyth, who writes, and you've covered some of your drafting and your editing, but he comes out with a slightly different angle here. He writes, I would like to request a discussion with Amor Towles and ask how and when he learned to turn such perfect phrases in his books with exquisite timing. Do they just flow out of him or does he grind to get the words? Okay.
John, thanks for the question. And so this is a little bit unsatisfying answer because it is both. But a lot of the careful writing is an expression of editing. And if you looked at a time lapsed movie of a paragraph of mine, it looks more like the process of doing an oil painting, a portrait. Where and this sounds crazy, but you could look at an early draft of a paragraph of mine. 3 out of 12 sentences might not even be finished. So it might be the first 3 words of the sentence with a ... because I'm not sure yet how that's going to sound. And there may even be a parenthesis in the middle of the paragraph saying earlier, maybe this should go earlier. And then, or it might, say, what about this? And so that's like round 1. Often there's incomplete sentences. And so as I say, if you looked at a time lapse of it, I'll then go back to the beginning I might write several pages, but the next morning I'll go back to that paragraph and I'll start from the beginning and I'll make changes in every sentence. I might solve something. I'll move a sentence. I'll fill out a sentence, but there's still gaps. And then the next day more comes in. And then finally it's a fully written paragraph, but it's still not right. So then you're rereading it again and saying this sentence needs to be removed. Rereading it again and saying this is an accurate word. This is a more resonant word, to go at this place than it's a better verb, whatever. So you just keep going over and over and over, and it gets sharper and sharper and sharper until it's, ultimately what you read. So the reality is that it is this sort of painstaking process of working over and over and over. But as I said, there's kind of both things are happening. And so I wanted to share with you the other one, which is that, because this is true too. When a reader approaches me around the country and says, hey, this passage really meant a lot to me, or, this sentence or these series of sentences I wrote down on a Post-it and put it, above my computer, or I mailed it to my daughter, or I read it to my, my husband, or whatever it is. 99% of the time, when someone says that to me, the sentence or passage that they're reading is something that I never would have thought of in the course of my daily life. It's something I wouldn't say to my kids. I wouldn't say it to a friend. It wouldn't occur to me myself. What's happened is that in the writing process, I have invented a person who I am not, with a different background than mine and a different psychology than mine. I then put that person in a situation in which I have never been. And occasionally, while I am writing about that person in that circumstance, that person will look around the room and suddenly say, the thing about it is, da-da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. And those come very fast. So that might be the kind of thing where it's 3 sentences, I never change a word of it. And I usually hit the period and I'm like, well done, Count. You nailed that. I mean, wow. Or
you
Sally.
Feel it in the moment.
Yeah,
like
Sally,
you've written a great one.
Yeah. Well, because it wasn't me. It feels like they made the observation. There's a lot of Sally sentences in the Lincoln Highway, which I think are really kind of quotable, but it's completely her. It's not me. And they come very fast. And I'm like, oh, Sally, you're hilarious. Mm-hmm. But so there is that kind of thing too. You can have that thing where
it's like you're eavesdropping in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the way it feels.
So this is why I say he's the only living writer never to have published a bad sentence. In case you were wondering, this is how it happens. The second and final from listeners, is from Charles Sorrentino. And this actually gets to the second point you were making there about passages that people put on Post-its. He writes in about the chapter in A Gentleman in Moscow, 1924, Anonymity, wherein you discuss the way that wine and furniture can provide links. Wine provides links to the world, and old furniture can provide links to our family history and our culture. And apparently for Charles, this is among the most highlighted passages in his e-reader. So the question is, do you have a favorite passage of your own? And second is, do you have a sense of what might be the most highlighted passage of yours out there in e-readers?
Oh my gosh. And you can look that up. I have not done that myself. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, the primary teacher I worked with at Stanford was Gilbert Sorrentino. So if you're related to him, thanks very much. He was a wonderful man and a great mentor. As far as I don't. The best thing I can say, and this is kind of related to what we were talking about a second ago, I have a friend who paints in a 19th century or even 18th century style. He's a great classical painter named Jacob Collins. And one of the things that Jacob's observed to me about his paintings is that, let's say you broke a painting down into all kinds of quadrants, maybe 16 quadrants, or let's say something like that. Is that when the painting is basically finished, he will often ask himself, out of all the 16 quadrants that make up this still life of tulips on a desk, or this portrait of a woman in a delicate gown, or because he's doing kind of that kind of work, he'll say, which of the quadrants is bugging me? Which of the quadrants is the worst quadrant in the painting? It could be her hands, it could be her eye, it could be, the whatever, the window in the distance behind her, what have you. And then he'll say, okay, what if I could take that quadrant that is the worst quadrant in the painting and make it the best quadrant in the painting? And that's a terrific challenge as an artist. And because he says, the interesting thing about that is, so I'll stop thinking about everything else, and I'll look at it, and then suddenly I'll say, this quadrant shouldn't be that window. It should be a girl peeking through the daughter, peeking through the, through the doorway or whatever it is, And then you discover what that should be. You paint it, and then suddenly it's your favorite part of the painting, And he said, what's interesting about that is when you take the worst quadrant and you make it the best quadrant out of 16, it has a big impact in the percentage lift.
Yeah, you elevate the entire.
You've elevated the whole thing by more than a 16th, if you want to put it that way. So substantially more than a 16th. So I quote this because it's totally the way I operate. I mean, Jacob and I share that, and I'm doing that in my own work. And so if there's a chapter that's not working for me, if there's a character that's not working for me, if there's a scene that's not working for me, if there's, a paragraph that's bogging me down, after the thing is finished, the draft of that chapter or the whatever, that's what I'm hunting for. I'm hunting for what's the thing that really is the worst part of this.
If I can flip it from worst to best.
And then again, it's not just fix it. How about it become the best part? And maybe there's something there, and reason it's bad is because it is a crux. And the reason it's bugging me is because it's not living up to the potential of what the event could be at this moment in time in the story. Because all the things are all set up for a great moment, and I've failed it. And so let's make it the best. And so, and occasionally it happens, and you can feel, as you say, the lift of the whole chapter and of the book in its entirety come out of that. And so the reason I go through that is because going back to the question is about, do I have a favorite passage? Let's say one of the book is that for me, a big part of making the book better and better and better is you try to fall in love with a new part of the book than yesterday. You find the part that you hate, and you gotta change it to the point where you're like, now that's great. And so it's not as if you walk away and say, oh yeah, that's the great part of the book. What you want to do is walk away and scattered throughout the book are these things which you have lifted up to, exceeding your own expectations, and that hopefully then will meet the reader's expectations later.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have. Sorry, so enough with listener mail. Any updates on book to film?
A week ago today, they began shooting A Gentleman in Moscow in Manchester. And Ewan McGregor is starring as the Count. When
they're shooting, it's real. They're like, nothing's real until correct. I mean, I guess maybe nothing's real until it actually hits the screen, but you're getting pretty real now.
Because now they've spent so much money, there's no backing out. So even if it's terrible,
who's behind all this?
Terrible,
is this like a big screen, small screen?
E1 is the production company. It is a 8-hour miniseries. It will show on Paramount Plus, which is Showtime in the United States, and all that's kind of being merged. But that's the streaming service in which it'll show. Ewan McGregor stars as the Count.
I love him. He's great.
He's great. I couldn't be happier. His wife is terrific, and is playing the love interest, Anna Urbanova in the story. And they met on the set of Fargo, the 3rd season, and have terrific chemistry. And are both Mary Elizabeth is an amazing actress. And so very excited about that too. It's really a British production. So it was written by Brits, directed by Brits. It'll be star Brits for the most part. Mary Elizabeth's an American, but most of the cast are kind of, the people that you will recognize from British crime, right, and British, and the
my wife and I joke there's like 12 actors in Britain. So you're seeing all the same people and everything. It's amazing.
But they're all excellent. So it'll be like that. So that's very exciting, and that'll come out. They'll shoot that this spring, and that'll come out in about a year. Rules of Civility. We have the head writer, the director, the showrunner, the lead actress, all in place. But that's kind of an earlier stage. They have the pilot, but not the whole series written, and they haven't built out the cast and everything else. And so I would hope that would come out in, 2 years, but that does not have an outlet yet, meaning so it has not been sold to a studio. And the Lincoln Highway, I have not optioned to anybody.
Still coming through the funnel. Okay. Well, look, I know it's all a separate project and it's different and distinct, and your work is your work, and that's something else, but it's still fun. Let's be honest. It's fun to see it happen.
It is fun. And I'm going to go, my wife and I are going to go visit the set in a couple of weeks. And, it's fun.
Oh, that's great.
It's a luxury to have such a large group of talented people trying to take your story and put it in a new medium. No question.
Yeah. All right. Next question. I hesitate to ask because I know that you don't like to talk too much about future work.
Yeah.
We've talked about the short stories, but in terms of the next novel, you, as I also feel, and many others, it takes some of the gas out of it. It's a little heat off the pan if you talk about it too much before it's done. But what can you tell us about the next book?
I'll tell you, I started it last spring, and then I put it on. I wrote about a quarter of it, and then I set it aside to finish the short story collection. And I partly did that because 2 of the characters in the short stories are characters in that novel, and I wanted to finish them and have them out in the world before the novel was released. And so I did that, and I spent the fall really finishing the short story collection. But the novel, then I'll go back to that in a couple of weeks, and it'll take me, another year or so to get the first draft done, probably. So we're looking at 2 years away from it to reach readers or something like that, 2.5 years. And that book begins in Cairo at the end of the Second World War, and it ends up in New York City in 1999. And that's all I would tell you about that.
Okay. So we're still on our 5-year pace here. We're looking at like a 25 kind of thing.
Pretty close.
All right. I'll take it whenever I can get it. Before the lightning round, I want to get into one last thing here, because I have always admired what great parents you and Maggie are from a distance. And I talked to my wife about this as well. So I was wondering if you can share with listeners 2 tips in particular that I know you guys do. One is this sort of Towles Cinema night, a Sunday night at the cinema at the Towles house. And then the second would be your sort of global cuisine selection for home cooking. Can you give folks stories here about those 2 stories? Because I think they're just terrific parenting tips and fun ideas to bring the family together.
Yeah, so the movie thing that Doug is referencing is, and of course, my children I have a child in college and a child is a senior in high school. So this goes back to when they were much younger, even 6 and 8 and 10 and 12 and 14 and 16, those kind of things. We would have family movie night. My spin on family movie night, for what it's worth, was it was not open for debate. So the movie was chosen by me. In this case, and we would assemble when we'd have the movie, and I would introduce it in kind of a silly way, but they would not know what it was until it began to run. And the reason that we did this, it wasn't because I'm a megalomaniac or something or a dictatorial guy. It's because when I've been in enough situations when you have 4 people of different ages and different tastes debating what we're going to see, the risk you run is that you constantly are watching the same thing over and over that's mediocre, because it's the only thing you can all settle on, And so this was a way of trying to get my kids to look at things that I thought were really entertaining, and I was entertained by. So we watched Errol Flynn's Robin Hood from 1938, which is an amazing movie, and they loved it. They would watch it over and over and over. And then, we watch Peter Sellers' Pink Panthers movies, which they would watch over and over and over.
Great idea. I've got to do that one.
Oh my God, they love that. So I would find these things, and then there are things sometimes we would talk about them or discuss them, but we'd all have a good time. We'd laugh, and every now and then. I was trying to be very careful to pick things that would entertain them and engage them, but every now and then they'd be like, "Dad, that was terrible," and so that's okay too. But so that's the one thing. But it did end up being that my kids, because it was very eclectic what we ended up looking at, and it was spanned decades. That they were like they have a very open view on movies in a very interesting way. So the parallel story is which Doug raised. I do a lot of cooking in the family. My wife cooks too, though, and we were kind of we were bogged down, and we were sort of what are we going to cook this week? What are we going to shop for tomorrow? Making the same things over and over. So we kind of made an agreement as a team, and so we had a couple of years where we said, all right, Monday night it's Italian, Tuesday night is Asia, Wednesday night is America, Thursday night is Latin, and that's what we're going to do. And so, when it's Italian, you make an Italian dish. When it's Asia, it could be Vietnamese, it could be sushi, it could be Chinese food. When it's Latin, it could be Mexican, it could be Costa Rican, it could be Spanish. And by setting up that rule, it was sort of like in advance, you say, okay, Tuesday's coming. So we gotta get an Asian dish in the roster. And what we ended up doing is going out and getting cookbooks from different countries, and we started experimenting. And what the amazing thing was, my wife and I learned to cook a much broader body of cuisine. But my kids, who were quite young at the time, they were like 8 and 10 when we were doing this, started doing this. If you said to them 2 years later, what are your favorite 10 meals? There were 7 out of the 10 came out of this experiment.
Wow.
Things we had never made before, they never tasted before. And it was just sort of like so like my kids are like, they want to go to food trucks anywhere in the world. They want to go, they'll eat anything. And we had so much fun. And so I expanded my repertoire. So
it's amazing to get the kids away from, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. And
the whites.
So after you told me this story years ago, I came home that night and I was so inspired by it. I'm like, we're going to do this. And so we go home and I have in my library like this sort of classic library globe, in my office.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
So I bring the family in. We're all 5 of us around the globe. And I spin it, and I say to our oldest son, like, just stop it. Like, press your finger on there and stop it. And we're going to cook something from wherever your finger is. And it landed on, like, Czech Republic or something like that.
Great.
Like, just something great. So I'm like, oh, Jesus, what are they making? I have no idea what that is. So we start Googling dishes, and we try to make the thing that sounded the best, and it wasn't great, I have to say. And so this thing only lasted like a couple more weeks that we
Spinning globe.
I am resolved to come back to developing more adventurous eaters in my family right now, away from pizza and mac and cheese. One other question: can you tell the listeners about Suits, your family?
Oh yeah. So on a related note, I grew up in a card playing family. My wife grew up in a card playing family, and so when our kids were quite young, we got in the habit of playing hearts together. So maybe my daughter was 6 or 7 at the beginning, and my son was a little older, and maybe somewhere around that zone. But because hearts you can play when you're quite young. We played Uno, we played Rat-a-tat-cat when my kids were really young. Then we played Uno, we played Gin, but eventually we were playing hearts. And we play, for those of you who know the game, you know this. You play. It's optimal for a 4-person game. You deal out the whole deck, and it is a point scoring game. And traditionally, the perfect way to play is you play 4 hands, and you pass 3 cards to your left in the first round, and 3 cards to your right in the second round, 3 cards across the table in the third round, and you don't pass cards in the 4th round, and then you keep score over the 4 hands, and you have a winner or and a loser, etc. So we would play, and we would do it. My wife and I would have a drink, sort of like this. My kids would not, and we'd play, let's say, 2 rounds or 3 rounds, kind of during cocktails while the sauce was simmering or whatever, and then we'd have dinner, and then we'd play like a final round, maybe before watching, the movie, let's say. And so we did this for a long time, and my kids are still card players now, in my 18-year-old daughter, my 21-year-old son, and we all play cards. But so Doug is fishing for this a little bit. We in last Thanksgiving, the 4 of us, we went to Brooklyn, and we all got tattooed. And we all have a tattoo now. We each have a tattoo on our inner right arm. And I have the spade, and my wife has the heart, and my daughter has the diamond, and my son has the club. And so we each have one of the suits.
That's awesome. Yeah, Love it.
There it is.
Love it. You and Maggie, just great job by you two.
We're doing our best we can, right?
No, you guys are awesome. All right, so on to the lightning round. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Favorite book as a kid?
I think my favorite book as a kid, kind of as a beginning to really think as a reader and an aspiring writer, was The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury, which is a series of short stories.
How old were you when you read that?
Ironically, The Illustrated Man, I hadn't even thought about this until just this second. He's a tattooed figure. He's like a guy who's walked out of a circus, and he has a tattoo all over his body. And there's a character like me, is a younger person, an older person, and they meet at a campfire. It's kind of like in Hobo Times or something. And late at night, the tattoos start to move on the body of the Illustrated Man, and each one tells a different story. And so the book is then a whole series of short stories which are depicted on his body. And it's, Ray Bradbury is famous as being one of the great, really the king of the golden age of science fiction in the United States. But he was a great writer of horror. He was a great writer of the eerie and the surreal. And so the Illustrated Man had all that going on.
Yeah. I reread, how old were you? I reread that like 5 years ago. How old were you when you read that?
Oh, I know.
It was
10,
not like
11, 12. Yeah.
Wow. And it was kind of creepy, scary stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
Loved it.
Book or books you're reading now?
I am reading, I just finished, which I really loved, was Peter Biskin's history of American movies in the 70s called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. For anybody who admires the movies of the 70s, whether it's the auteur stuff like Scorsese and Coppola and Altman, or the blockbusters that came in the late 70s like Star Wars and Jaws, it's a totally gossipy, fascinating, fun read. Easy Riders, Raging Bulls.
Well, nice. Favorite few, and I'm dying to hear your answer on this one. Favorite few recent TV shows to recommend to listeners?
I would. I mentioned Fargo a second ago, and I think Fargo, the television series. I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan. I think Miller's Crossing is one of the greatest movies of the post 60s and 70s. And but I actually think the series Fargo is more satisfying than the Coen Brothers movie.
Is that William H. Macy? I never watched that.
Well, it's no, he's in the movie.
Okay.
But the series, what makes it interesting is each season it's a different cast and it's a different year and a different crime. But it's done in a Coen Brothers sensibility. So the Coen Brothers clearly deserve enormous credit because the creators of the series are it's an auteur. It's the same writer-director who's drawing on the inventive approach to storytelling that the Coen Brothers have, their sense of humor, their dark, sort of view of American life. They're all the sort of Coen-esque elements are there. But you're getting the pleasure of seeing this sort of crime story play out over 8 or 10 hours. And each season is amazing. And one of the seasons, as I said, Ewan McGregor stars as playing two brothers who are at odds. And it's great. But I love that. You probably mentioned on this, Slow Horses is amazing.
Oh, I love that. Oh my God. Fellow Yale undergrad, Lee Bardugo recommended that one. And so after she did, I went out and watched it. It's amazing.
Terrific. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Terrific.
So funny. Although I could do without the Gary Oldman character and some of his crass thing. I was like, whoa.
You gotta
some of the bodily functions he was dealing with were
toe-picking, nose-picking qualities. But that's what makes it, to see Gary Oldman do this is great.
Last book that made you laugh out loud.
I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I think for real comedy, and I do read books with humor and I enjoy books, but I really do. For my comedy, I turn to stand-up. I'm a stand-up fan, and I watch a wide array of the one man or woman shows, and God bless the Netflix and Amazon who kind of, when we were kids, you would buy The Record by Richard Pryor, listen
Murphy,
to it over and over and over, and but so now suddenly those guys realize nobody's putting comics up on the screen so they could get them cheaply, and so now they're all available, and so I particularly like I do like the people who shock me. I must say the provocateurs, I do like them, but I really like the guys who build, men and women who build comedy around narratives, and so like Norm Macdonald has some of these jokes that the joke is 15 minutes long, and it's amazing the way he strings them out. Another guy I love along those lines is Goldman. It's named Gary Goldman, who does these great long thought experiments as jokes. And one of which is he imagines the team that gets together to figure out the two letter codes for states. So like MA is Massachusetts, and it is the greatest.
Some of those don't make any sense.
Yeah, and he goes through the whole thing, just keeps going and going and going, imagining the conversation they have, and it's hilarious.
Yeah.
So that's my comedy thing.
Oh, that's great. Let's see your reading group. This question has a little bit of a lead in. You're in this reading group. You've been in for many years. I think maybe prior to becoming a writer yourself, you've been in a reader. You've always been a very heavy reader, as you mentioned, going back to your Martha's Vineyard, youth summers. And you guys have a habit, I think, of sometimes reading a chunk of someone's body of work. You'll pick 4, 5, 6 books by the same author.
Yeah.
Read that and then get together and discuss. Which author surprised you the most or sort of defied your expectations?
So there's 4 of us. We've been reading together for almost 20 years. We read a novel a month, and we generally read dead authors. So we are reading something that, has reached some sort of status of a classic, even if it was, it might be 1850, but it could be 1950. And we do it by projects. So we'll tend to read 5, 6, 7, 8 books in a row in sequence. And it might be 8 books from the same writer or from the same region or around a central theme. And one of the things that we did that was, so as a project over a multi-year time frame, is we read the works of Nobel Prize winning novelists who didn't write in English and who none of us had read. So we kind of brought up the list of all the winners of the Nobel Prize.
What are a couple of names off that list?
So there's all kinds of weird people, so the answer to your question was, one of them is Naguib Mahfouz, who's the first person to win the Nobel Prize in literature for writing in Arabic. And that's in a way not a coincidence, because the novel, for instance, was not did not grow out of an Arabic writing tradition. There was no history of writing something similar to the novel in the 19th and 18th centuries. And Mahfouz in the early 20th century fell in love with the European 19th century novels, and is one of the people who is really sort of recognized as developing the novel in the Arab world for their sensibility, for their themes, for their culture. And he wrote this trilogy called the Cairo Trilogy, which is 3 novels. It's a family over 3 generations in Cairo, and it is terrific. It's an amazing book and full of surprises and satisfying to a Western reader for the reasons that you might anticipate, because he's an admirer of sort of the history of Western culture and Western storytelling, but then filled with all kinds of things which are beyond the scope of what the typical American is going to engage, in terms of looking at the life in Cairo in the 1920s and 30s and 40s.
Oh, that's great. I love the mandate of the group. That's hearkening back to the adventurous eating around the globe. You're doing some adventurous reading and finding
projects.
some cool
I'm a project
stuff.
guy.
I love it. Least attended book event ever.
Easy. The least attended book event ever was during Rules of Civility, I'm glad to say. So it was earlier in my career. And I'd be sad if it was now. But it was at a point when Rules of Civility had been out for about a year, and it had been on the Los Angeles Times bestseller list for a year.
For paperback at this point.
Yeah, for the entire year. And so I went to Los Angeles, and I went to go speak at the great independent bookstore, Book Soup, which is up on Sunset Boulevard or there. And the attendance was 0.
Oh.
And I got to say, 0 is so much better than 1.
Right.
Because
you're off the hook.
After 5 minutes, you're like, guys, thanks for having me.
We tried,
but good luck, everybody. And I was out of that door and so then you actually get in this funny thing where
that's funny. 0 is better than 1.
10 minutes before go time, you're like, shit, nobody's here and no one's going to be here. And so then you're going to this very interesting thing where you're watching the front door. And every time the bell rings and somebody walks in, you're like, please do not be please do not be here to see me. Please don't. And you're watching where they go in the store, and then they go off to like the kids section. You're like, thank God,
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, I got out of there without having to speak on a big 0 attendance.
Wow. All right. Well, you heard it here. Even Amor Towles has had a 0. Amazing. Last question. One piece of good advice for the listeners. I'm
going to give this advice, which is writing advice. I mean, and for me, the only advice I really have is, and it's pithy, I guess, but it's still true, which is for me, it's read, write, repeat. Because that's what it's been. Ever since I was a little kid, I would read things that interested me, and then I'd write. When I was young, I used to actually copy what they were doing, but more it's sort of read and be affected by what the person's doing, observe what they're doing, be excited by what they're doing, and then go off and do your own thing and allow that to kind of percolate up through the draft a little bit. And even though that might not be that thing you're writing right then, might be too derivative and not the best work, what you're doing is you're taking those elements of craft and learning them so they can be of use later for your own work. And that is I think the greatest way to develop craft as a writer.
Awesome. Amor, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in. That was so fun.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the drink. Thanks for the chat. Great to see you.
See you soon. If you enjoyed this podcast, please download, rate, subscribe, write a comment. Let me know the authors you want to hear from. I read all the comments. Thank you.